Hello everybody and welcome to the Rule of 72. Here on this channel we review games between 1 and 72. Now just a quick disclaimer here for this video. This is the second video on this channel, but the first 3 videos on this channel are actually a re-upload from my original channel. I had to make the decision to take the reviews of this format and make it its brand new own channel. So I hope that clears up some confusion. If you guys hear during this episode where I'm referencing previous videos on the channel, I'm talking about my J72 gaming channel. But as long as you know that, you should be able to fully enjoy this review if you haven't seen it before. So thank you for watching, and now time to get into what you guys clicked on, which is reviewing The Isle between 1 and 72. Enjoy, guys. The Isle is an outstanding game in the creature survival genre, one that I think many would say is the premier choice out of all the options. It has taken the core idea of the genre, which is simply controlling a creature from juvenile all the way up its life to adulthood, and has polished it with spectacular graphics, a horror-inspired vibe, a realism take on finding food, and terrifying giant dinosaurs to play. Now, I've been covering The Isle here on this channel from the start. This is the first game that really captivated me to want to make videos on it. And I've been playing the game all the way back since the Legacy version, so it's been a while. And I've been through the roller coaster ride of updates and releases and all that jazz. But today I wanted to review The Isle and give it a number, give it a hard score, a number that we can grade up against all other games that we review in the future. But here on the J72 Gaming channel, we don't rank things out of 1 to 10. We don't rank things out of 1 to 100. No. It's the 72 channel. We rank things out of 72. The Rule of 72 is a grading rule set for video games that does just that. It splits the 72 points down into 7 categories that we can rate, each category being worth 10 points, with the final 2 points potentially being awarded at the end. This video is only the second Rule of 72 review that I've done this way, as Path of Titans, easily the Isle's biggest competitor in the market, was the first game to be graded this way. So, today, before we dive into the ins and outs of the Isles, let's quickly break down the 7 categories and how the point systems will play out. The first 10 points are awarded based off the game's gameplay. Good graphics, outstanding audio, and high performance are great, but at its core, a game's gameplay can be the most impactful aspect of the video game. Fun, addicting, and/or exciting games will receive a high gameplay score. A 10 out of 10 example is Guitar Hero. The next category of 10 points is all about the game's story, lore, or simply its setting for some more simple games. But immersive games with style and a strong vibe of its own will rank highly here. A 10 out of 10 example is Firewatch. Category 3 is all about the game's performance. This ranks how well the game feels to control things like character movement, keybinds, and UI integration, but also how well the software handles on a chosen hardware. Games are going to need to feel good and run well to get a high performance grade. A great 10 out of 10 example for its time, Super Mario 64. Next 10 points up for grabs are all about how shiny the graphics are, but also about how stylized the world is. Pixelated or blocky games like Minecraft can still rank high if they ooze personality and style. Another great 10 out of 10 example for its time, Little Big Planet. Audio is up next, an area of a game that can easily be overlooked, but will stand out dramatically if it's of high quality. Voice acting, music soundtracks, or just simple sound effects can go a long way for a game if used well. A 10 out of 10 example is the new Baldur's Gate 3. The penultimate category, number 6, is all about the game's community and multiplayer aspects. Both about how well people who play the game interact with each other outside the game, and also how well the game facilitates the multiplayer systems built into each game. An outstanding example for this category is Super Smash Bros., specifically Melee. And the last category is all about replayability and overall value that a game holds. This generally ranks the game as a whole, and thus is saved for the end. High-ranking games here will have the player coming back for more and more, or can simply be an outstanding single playthrough packed full of value. A 10 out of 10 example for this is World of Warcraft Vanilla/Classic. Now once we have all 7 of these categories scored out, we will still have 2 more points to go, the 71st point and the 72nd point. Point 71 is for games that are worth completing. Now this can mean different things based on different games, but if a game is worth its value when trying to do everything it has to offer, it will be worth completing and thus worthy of point 71. And point 72, ladies and gentlemen, is my point to award games. If a game is one that I consider to be an absolute favorite of mine, then it will be getting the golden star of point 72. Alright everybody, with all that laid out, let's dive into the world of The Isle. Now, I do want to be honest with you guys that I'm going to be brutally honest with this review. I've already reviewed The Isle for about 3 years now, so today is going to be, well, it's going to be real. I'm not going to be holding back my punches. It's going to get high praise when it needs it, but it's going to get some low blows when it deserves that too. So, with that ominous statement said for you guys, I hope you are ready to dive into this. So make sure you sit back, make sure you kick back, and grab a snack, because it's time to dive into The Isle once again. Enjoy. Alright folks, let's talk about The Isle's gameplay, and its, at times, lack of it. You see, playing The Isle at its most simplest is choosing from one of the game's dinosaurs or prehistoric reptiles, and enjoying that creature's life out on the island. This will have you choosing from herbivores, carnivores, or omnivores, and honestly the options to choose from are fairly large and varied at this stage in the game's lifetime. Each creature also feels unique with different ways it attacks and the different types of diets each creature relies on to grow. The Isle has a passive growth system in their game, which is fairly common in the creature survival genre. But what sets the Isle apart is that the type of foods you will eat will grant different stats that can help you along your growth, with the biggest benefit being if you manage to find and eat foods from all 3 different types. Having all 3 food types in your diet will have you growing the fastest possible, so it behooves players to seek out all those diets. Now on paper, this is a fantastic system to have in the game, as it will have the players searching all over the map and being active in the ecosystem. Without it, and you would have no reason to risk yourself coming out from the safety of a cave or a bush that is so easy to want to hide in when you're small. How this diet system actually plays out in the Isle, however, is a bit more complicated than simply working or not working. So let me discuss a bit with you guys the history of Isle for a minute, to help set the stage at how this diet system is currently working in its most recent update. The diet system released back on a map called Isla Spyro, which, up until very recently, was the main map on their Ivrima branch, which, alright, I guess I need to back up a bit more in the Isle's history timeline to really set the scene for this game. You see guys, the Isle has had a very long and a very complicated history of updates. Some of these updates, like the Ivrima update, fundamentally redefined the game. So much so that the original version of the game, the version that ran from 2015 to 2020, was abandoned to completely work on a new, completely recoded and reworked version of the game that they now call Ivrima. Ivrima is what I personally have covered on this channel, as Ivrima has dramatically enhanced many aspects of this game, but I did start playing back in 2016 with the version that they now call Legacy. In this video I'm only going to be covering the new Ivrima version, as that is what is in current development, and in my opinion is the superior version of the game. But tons of people still have a large passion for the classic way to play, and prefer a Legacy. My point of bringing all this up is to help show that the diet system, and thus the way to grow, arguably the main gameplay focus, has looked very different throughout this game's lifespan. Upon the diet system's release on the Isla Spyro map, it tremendously disappointed me. While the system was good on paper like I said, its implementation was just poor. Now they said that the different plants could be located in different biomes, but in actuality there were only a few pinpoint locations on the map that they were, causing tons of players to congregate in those central locations, and thus the large majority of the map was barren of food and players. But, luckily for the diet system, a new map has dropped recently called Gateway, which is now the official and main map to play on. This map is a huge improvement for the overall setting of this game, but does shake up how the gameplay plays out for many reasons that we will get into over the course of this video. But if we are to focus on diets for Gateway, I think it's an improvement overall. As of the time of writing this script, Gateway has only been out for less than a week, and I have spent time getting a Pteranodon, a Bipiosaurus, a Gallimimus, and a Carnotaurus, all to full adult to see how each type of creature in this game plays out. Overall, much more food is around the map, and they even have a migration system in place to help the herbivores find an abundant food source. So they have done a lot, in my opinion, to update this core aspect of their game. But, sadly, this is once again only on paper, because for some odd reason with the Gateway update, they have just decided to nerf the absolute hell out of stamina regen. So much so that it is way more unenjoyable to move your creatures around the map than it ever has been in this game. It's a very baffling change, and was probably done with only combat in mind, And while it may help make combat more balanced, it just kinda sucks to run for a minute and then have to sit for 5. Simply put, dude, I get bored. It makes me not want to play the Isle when I'm just sitting for so long. Calling this game a bush simulation has some very solid merit these days. Some creatures like the Carno were less affected, as I tended to just kind of walk around, saving my sprint and stamina for more important moments like hunting. But the Gallimimus, a creature meant to run, just had me sitting for huge portions of my creature's life to regain its stamina. And don't even get me started on what they did to my boy the Pteranodon. It's even worse for the Flyers. So it's important to take into account when we review the Isle's gameplay score here, that this game is highly versatile on how much fun it actually is at times. Updates seem to come with this game that adds huge new systems, but the actuality of the success of each system is highly volatile within the player base. These dramatic update changes I think help fuel the high amounts of hype the Isle player base is known for, but it also helps fuel the toxicity when the reality of the game hits. We'll cover that a bit more in the community multiplayer score though, so let's bring it back around to the gameplay score. One aspect I want to touch upon for the Isle that, honestly, I have very little to complain about, is this game's combat, which I think is really holding down the gameplay score here for the Isle, because after you do succeed in getting to full adult with your creature, PvP is really one of the only things you can seek out. Well, also nesting, but let's shelf that idea for a second as well. I'll get into why combat feels so good in the performance category, but each creature in this game, well, most creatures, have their own unique combat advantages that really help change the gameplay up based off the creatures that you are playing and the creatures you are fighting. Packies and Carnos have headbutts, the Troodons have a group-oriented playstyle with the Venom, the Omniraptors have a Pounce, Tenatos and Stegos use their tails, etc. The differences here make the gameplay each time you sit down with the game varied, and I think that's a great thing. It also is the main reason why the Isle's player base is so fixated on wanting new and more creatures to be added to the game, because each creature adds so much more gameplay. The nesting aspect of the game is also very wholesome, and while it does exist in other creature survival games, it has always felt best for me, personally, here in the Isle. Getting a creature to full adult, searching for a mate, which is going to be another player, and having both of you commit to finding a safe spot, building a nest, and raising up other players is a very special and unique feeling that these creature survival games have to offer. It's honestly some of the best times I've had in this game, and I want to cover that more in the multiplayer category, so let's try to wrap up this very long gameplay segment. Overall, guys, the gameplay for Isle is a varied mixed bag. It can have very high and exciting moments during combat, or staring out over the absolutely glorious vista views, and its nesting and diet system feel unique and keep you relatively active in the map. However, I think it equally has gameplay elements that bring the score way down. The lack of diets being placed in proper locations over most of this game's history has hindered it severely in my eyes, and the current stamina changes that force you to sit and wait for a large portion of your playthrough, it just really sours the gameplay experience and stops me from wanting to log into the newest update of the game. So while I do have moments that are enjoyable, they are sparse, to be honest, and a lot of the time this game, I just get kind of bored. Which is sad to admit, but if I'm being fully honest with you all, the Isle's gonna get a very middling score of 5 out of 10 for its gameplay. It's a 10 out of 10 sometimes, but it's also a 1 out of 10 other times, so the average gameplay score of 5, I think suits it overall. Alright folks, let's dive into this game's story, lore, and setting grade now. The Isle has been very cryptic with its lore over the years. They love to push this horror narrative where humans have been experimenting on dinosaurs, and that's the reason they're all here on the island. But the only real moments of these storytelling elements happen in their trailers or short videos they post to kind of hype up the community. The vibe is a fun and creepy setting that they are trying to craft, but just like the gameplay, I think they can do so much more to really capitalize on what they're going for. Plus, if we were to look at the storytelling elements within the actual game, well, they're pretty much non-existent besides a few human elements that have been in-game. On Isla Spiro, we had a small collection of human buildings, but nothing grand or exciting. There was a port that never got finished, which is a real shame, as it would have been very cool to walk around a massive concrete jungle as a dinosaur. They did have something similar in the Legacy version in one of those maps, although in Ivrima they have just continued to give the player unfinished assets throughout the whole lifespan of Ivrima. This trend of giving the player access to unfinished things has actually continued over the new map of Gateway as well, where there are giant biodomes, assumed to be human test facilities with different biomes within. Well, those are actually inaccessible currently, and only time will tell if we will ever actually get those finished. Now, I hate to be constantly sounding disappointed in this game's review so far, but the Isle's constant development cycle, without actually giving the player a finished map, has been exhausting, to be honest. I understand that this game is, quote, still in early access development, but dude, it's been 8 years since this game was released in 2015, and it's been 3 years with Evrima. And during this time, they have had so many maps released that just get abandoned. So while I do want to talk about how beautiful this new Gateway map is, it's hard not to focus on what could be yet another bait and switch. It could be another unfinished map that we have for a year or so until they move on to yet another unfinished map. With complaints and concerns sort of out of the way though, let's focus solely on the setting here on the new Gateway map. Because simply looking at the aesthetics of this place, well, I mean, it's gorgeous. Rolling mountains with rich valleys and stunning beaches, lakes, dams, vistas, even some large dinosaur gates that give off really big Jurassic Park vibes. If they do continue to develop it and finish this Gateway map, well, I will be a happy camper. Wandering this new map has been very enjoyable, besides the stamina changes that forced me to sit for minutes on end. But I do think that this map is a huge leap forward for the Isle, and I do want that to reflect on its setting score. So I think that a 6 out of 10 is a fair grade for the Isle's story, lore, and setting grade. It's got aspects of human development that take its lore into a horror-driven angle, and its maps have been improving over time, but the game has yet to really finalize on any of these aspects. I think if they utilized their element of humans and spent more time polishing and finishing up the maps that we are offered, then this grade would easily gain more points. But currently, I think a 6 is as much as I can award it now. Performance time. Okay, oh boy. This segment for Isle is probably already having some of you screaming 0 out of 10 because, well, I gotta be honest with ourselves. This game's software does not perform well on a large majority of people's hardware. Simply put, it's not an easy game to run. However, I'm not going to give it a 0 simply because it takes a more expensive rig to run. Sadly, this is a game that is not for those with low-end computers. I personally struggled for years to get this game to optimize well, and it wasn't until I had a much more top-of-the-line computer that it finally felt near flawless to run. As of today, the Gateway update on my NVIDIA 3060 Ti, AMD Ryzen 5 5600 6-core processor with 64GB of RAM, it runs phenomenally. But it runs most games well, so that's not too much of a shock. Historically though, each update for this game has shaken up how well it runs for people. There have been time and time again when updates will actually make the game unplayable for people who were able to run the previous update. So it's safe to say that the requirements to play this game have constantly gotten higher as time has gone on, which isn't completely unheard of for games that are still in active development, but it's still a punch to the gut for fans of this game who logged onto an update only to find out that they can no longer play. This category of performance grade, however, does also include how well the game controls from a player's point of view. And I do have to say that controlling these creatures feels absolutely amazing. So praise where praise is due, right? Running, sliding, flying, and diving into the water feels incredible to say the least. I really don't think I've played a game that lets you control a creature that has felt so impactful. Every turn and angle you take with your creature feels weighty, but not so much that you're driving a boat. No, weighty in a way that you feel connected to the size and strength of your creature. If we were to grade this performance category solely on how impactful controls were, I'd probably give this score a 9 because it feels wonderful to move these beasts around. This, in turn, really does help the combat out in this game. It feels extremely realistic due to your accuracy required to hit your target. But it's not difficult due to the finesse that you're able to perform with your chosen creature. Combat in the Isle is easily the best combat out of any creature survival game that I've ever played, and it's simply going to boost this performance grade much higher than it would be if I simply relied on its software's average performance. So this one's a hard grade since we have a low software performance and a high control performance, so I think I'm going to have to give the Isle another 6 in this grade. It's yet another category where I think overall it's about middling. If you have a fancy computer that can run all modern new titles, then yes, I think it could be a much higher score, maybe an 8. But on average, most players have had issues with this game over the years, and I can't in good faith ignore these complaints. 6 out of 10 for the Isle's performance grade. Okay. I hear you guys. These categories so far have been a bit harsh on the Isle's score. Realistically harsh, I think, but lower scores than some may have expected for this game so far. So let's talk about something that I think this game does nearly perfectly. I'll tell you right off the bat too. Isle is getting 10 out of 10 for its graphics and style. So while this game may struggle on some computers to run well, for those computers that can handle the intensity of the software, dude, this game looks stunning. I think the graphics and style is easily one of the things that most people like to boast about this game. I mean, just take a look. Dinosaur models are extremely detailed and even changed based off if the creature is wet or muddy. The foliage around the world has some of the highest quality that I've ever seen in the industry. This stuff is on par with what Rockstar Entertainment is able to produce, arguably better in some regards. Simply put, I think the Isle has some of the most realistic graphics that I've ever had the pleasure to play with. My absolute favorite thing to do in this game is to turn off all the lights in my room, I crank up the volume of my headset, and I just get immersed in the realism of the world around me. You really do feel connected to your chosen dinosaur in this world, and for all the complaints and concerns I have about the actual gameplay systems behind the game, you can trust that your eyes will be enjoying everything you see. I also want to take time to focus on this game's water, because I think it's probably the best water effects that I have ever seen. Period. The ripples and wave effects are flawless, which goes a long way when playing the hours required for a Deinosuchus. But they also make the water blurry for non-aquatics, and much more clear for the aquatics, helping boost this horror genre that they want to lean into, since walking up to the water's edge to get a drink is easily the scariest thing every creature in this game has to do. It looks great, and hopefully you're not too distracted by the amazing effects, because well, there might be a giant crocodile lurking in the depths that you are just unable to see. The new Gateway map has also taken a huge step forward in its variety of foliage and biomes, helping push this style grade even higher and higher. I really can't see the Isle getting anything other than a 10 for graphics and style, and I do think they are going to be leading the industry in this regard for many more years to come. Let's continue this hype train of compliments for the Isle, because alongside the stunning visual graphics and realistic style comes some of the best audio my ears have ever had the pleasure to listen to. The Isle's audio is an example of how a game's audio can sometimes be overlooked, but if it's done correctly, it can launch a game's enjoyability into a very high score. The immersion I feel when looking out over this game's incredible vista views is only pushed deeper when I am listening to the ambient audio of the current biome I'm in. Now take a listen real quick as I turn off this game's music and just immerse yourself for a few seconds with this game's audio. You hear how the leaves rustle when I pass through foliage, or how there are birds and insects chirping and buzzing around. It's such high quality, honestly, that it makes playing every other creature survival game around just dull in comparison. I also want to talk about how the distance of roars plays out in the Isle. Now, if there is a Carno roaring off in the distance, it actually is distorted and muffled based off of how far away it is, or if there are mountains or a forest in the way. And if it gets closer, you will hear its breathing and grunting as it trots along. Footprints also change based off what your creature's stepping on. Clay sounds like a heavy thud, forest floors have cracks of sticks, and wading through water splashes and crashes. It's so immersive that it blows my mind sometimes. Music also plays depending on the situation you're in, so the relaxing ambient audio is complemented with a soundtrack that fits the correct vibe. This is really noticeable when you enter combat or get near another player, with intense music that also has some horror vibes to it. It's really well done. So I think it's no surprise that audio for the Isle is going to get another 10 out of 10. It really is exactly what it needs to be in a creature survival game. It helps facilitate the world, it grants intense immersion towards the creature you're playing, and the music doesn't get in the way or feel out of the place. It only starts up to fit the vibe of your current situation. The Isle is an example to all other games out there on how to not only make the game look great, but how to immerse your players with impeccable audio. Straight up, bravo on these two aspects, Isle. Bravo. Alright folks, this next section is all about the game's ability to facilitate multiplayer, but also about the community behind the game. Let's start first with how well multiplayer plays out on a functional level within the game. Multiplayer in the Isle is interesting and leans heavily on realism. You see, in order to join a group with another player, you have to be the same species and physically stand next to each other. You then make a friendly call, the other player can accept the group. Now, while this makes the game more realistic, as a normal creature would also have to do basically the same thing, it really hinders the ability to find groupmates on a server-wide scale. Now, I can appreciate the realism approach, but honestly, I think that some sacrifices to immersion need to be made in order to make a game experience a whole lot easier. Let me break down this issue to you guys with an example. See, when the new update dropped, I managed to convince a buddy of mine to try out the new map with me. Unfortunately, since we both didn't know where we were, we had to try to figure it out on the fly, using things like, I'm on the coast, or I'm near the giant arch-looking rock. Those were the best things we could use. And ultimately, we actually couldn't even locate each other before he got bored with the new stamina changes and his creature ended up dying as well. He decided he had enough, and we ended up wanting to go play a different game. And now this is a group of 2 players, one being myself who has a lot of knowledge on the game and trying to help him, and another essentially being a new player, finding it hard to have a seamless and enjoyable experience. Some people might say, well yeah, this game's a bit more hardcore, and you have to work to group up. But I would argue that this game loses nothing by allowing friends to group up with a simple menu invite. It's just a bit unwelcoming and a bit overly complicated than it needs to be, in my opinion, for the majority of the player base to simply have a good time. That said, however, when you do manage to group up with players, the group experience can be one of the most enjoyable ways to play this game. It does make all that sitting you need to do a bit less tedious when you can fill the time chatting with your backmates. I do also want to spend time talking about the nesting aspect of this game, because I do think that one of the best ways to experience this game is by being nested in as a hatchling to a mother and father player. It's a very unique experience to have other players' main focus being to raise you up to adulthood. It's honestly pretty wholesome at times, and extremely enjoyable. I do highly recommend trying to get into a pack of raptors or a giant herd of stegos or tenontosauruses. It's definitely the peak gameplay experience that this game has to offer. We do have to mention, though, the dark and dreary side to this game, and that is just how absolutely toxic the average player base is. So excuse me while I spend a minute or so explaining this. It's going to sound like a bit of a rant. But honestly, the player base throughout the years has been teased with potential updates that end up taking forever to come out. And when they do, they're usually a bit lackluster or simply unfinished, like the map problems I mentioned earlier. What this has done has bred a culture of unsatisfied and honestly pissed off players who are just fed up with the quality of this game's gameplay. Sure, it looks great and it sounds incredible, and that is definitely helping keep this game alive. But for my time as a content creator with this game for the past 3 years, it has been painfully apparent to me just how mad this game has made some people. When you take a game so beloved by many in its legacy version, abandoning the original project beloved by so many people, it's bound to piss people off. And when that replacement version of the game has so much promise, but fails to deliver on a consistent and finished basis, well, even those people who stuck around, they're now getting mad too. The toxicity in this player base is honestly unparalleled in the gaming world. I guess it would be similar to things like Fallout 76, Kingdom Hearts 3, and the original release of Cyberpunk. These games have taken an incredibly passionate fan base and just broke their hearts with the unfinished and lackluster releases. The Isle has come far to fixing these issues over time, but it has never really hit a home run yet to completely satisfy the player base. The developers also, to be straightforward and frank with you all, are full of controversy and consistent vile remarks. The lead developer, Dondi, has on multiple occasions during his stream just been an asshole. He's always complaining about his players, saying rude remarks about content creators, and is just generally unpleasant to listen to. Now, if you don't want to take my word for it, then you can check out his stream VODs, but personally, I have made an active decision to distance myself from this development team. You see, why should I, as a content creator, sign up for stress testing a game that obviously doesn't care about those that it's asking to help? It's baffling, honestly, his attitude, and I think it has had adverse consequences on the player base, fueling a disrupted and conflicting opinion base. Within the game, we also have some issues regarding multiplayer, like players mix packing to have a greater advantage in combat, or creating piles of players just hanging out at one popular spot, aptly named Cuddle Puddles, which make the rest of the world feel a bit barren, but these issues are actually less of a concern compared to other creature survival games like Path of Titans, for example. But they do exist, and thus do help make the overall gameplay experience worse due to unintended multiplayer cultures. So let's wrap this category up, because I really don't like dwelling on the bad side of this game. It was much more fun talking about the stellar graphics and audio, but it needs to be said, and it needs to be taken into account when grading this game. The Isle's getting a 3 out of 10 for its multiplayer and community score. Not only does this game make grouping up difficult, but the player base as a whole has been beaten down over time with the lackluster updates, the long time between them, and the piss-poor attitude from their lead developer. I think the experience you can find hidden away in the game relating to nesting and having a pack or herd experience, it does help boost this up to the 3 score. But the majority of the Isle's community reputation is overshadowed by toxicity, complaints, and straight up arguments, which is unfortunate in a game that has always had so much potential. Alright, let's bring this whole video back around and talk about this game's overall replayability and value score, which I think does a fairly good job at, to be fair. Playing the different species does feel different, and personally I've always tried to get different species up to full adult at least once. And if I want to go that extra mile, then I will also try to nest in a few hatchlings. This has offered a decent bit of replayability over the years, as it's much more common for you to meet a tragic demise before you fulfill those goals. So in regard to all the different species, I do think that the Isle holds up a solid bit of replayability. The maps are also fun to explore, even with the few unfinished aspects of them, and trying to understand the ecosystems around you and thus finding a good nesting spot, it's a true challenge that has a lot of different aspects to debate when you're playing. And since each creature has its own niche, finding those perfect spots to grow or nest, it feels different each time you play. And since I've harped on already in other sections of this review about the gameplay strength and issues, I hope you guys now have a good understanding when I say that this game's replayability and value score, it's going to be a 5 out of 10. Its replayability does help to boost up the score, but its value has been a rocky ride to say the least. It looks phenomenal, it sounds exceptional, and it controls amazingly. But playing the Isle can also be exhausting, boring, and a letdown. It's just frustrating. And that tanks its value overall. 5 out of 10 for replayability and value. So with those 7 categories laid out for us folks, the Isle's current score is a 45 out of 72. But hold on, we have 2 more points to potentially award. The 71st point I said would be awarded to games that I believe should be completed. Now, what do I think that this means for the Isle? Well, I think completion in this game would mean trying out every creature, getting them to full adult, finding a mate, and successfully having a nest and getting those creatures to adults. And while I do think that this goal is the most interesting way to play and challenge yourself in this game, based off everything I mentioned about this game's overall value, and while I don't think that it's actually worth doing for the average gamer. Do it once on your favorite creature, sure. And if the pitfalls of this game don't bother you as much as I think it does the majority of players, then more power to you, and I think that there is a rich and full game here for you. But for the average gamer who just wants to buy this game today, no, I don't think it's worth you putting in the time and effort into completing that goal for every creature available to play. It's a close call for me, but I am not going to award the 71st point to the Isle. And so that leaves the final point, the 72nd point, and the point that I award to my favorite games of all time. And this one's hard for me to decide on, guys. For years I would have said yes to this and easily awarded this game as a favorite. But as time has gone on and consistent lackluster updates have dropped, I have felt my enjoyment for this game dwindle. It really does pain me to think how much passion I've held for this game over the years, and how much it has fallen from grace in my opinion. Somehow, despite Irima getting better on a technical term, the development has consistently made decisions on its gameplay systems that baffle, upset, and straight up bore me, to the point that I don't find myself having nearly as much fun as I used to in this game. So for me, currently, I do not consider The Isle one of my favorite games of all time. In the past, yes, and in the future, possibly. But as it stands today, it is a game that falls just short of that mark. So folks, without the 71st and 72nd point to be awarded, The Isle stands at the final score, using the rule of 72, at a 45 out of 72. Here we can see it on the wall of 72 up against all the other games that have been graded this way, which is currently only Path of Titans. But over time, we will continue to add games to this wall of grades, and perhaps in the future we can take another look at The Isle if their updates improve the quality, consistency, and value of the game. In conclusion, everybody, The Isle is a creature survival game that pushes the genre forward in its visuals, styles, models, controls, and audio. But its frequent disappointments have just beaten down the player base and overall community by having frustrating game systems, unoptimization, and inconsistent software, and a lead development team that could use with a bit of PR training. I want to thank you all for watching this review, and I do understand the disappointment for some of you that it ranked a 45 out of 72. Trust me, I understand more than most how it feels to have your favorite game just kind of plummet in your own personal love for it, right? But anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this review, and I hope you enjoy the format. If you want to see more from me, leave a comment down below on how you would break down this categories and this grade. I'm interested to see how you guys would all break it out. Again, my voice is dying at the end of these voice recordings. It's always a long day, so I'm sure you can hear the roughness. But yeah, guys, if you want more from me too, you can join our Discord, link down below. As well, if you want a little bit more videos from me, you can join by becoming a member to be a squad captain here in the Sauropod squad. But with all that said, everybody, I hope you enjoyed this. And yeah, that has been it from me. Stay tuned for another Rule of 72 review coming out soon. But until next time, guys, I have been Jay, and I hope you all have a great day. Peace out.